Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. Thank you again for joining us for another Community Connection in Times of Crisis webinar series. We've been hosting these every week since the COVID-19 crisis really ramped up in the United States, and we plan on continuing to do so for as long as it's helpful. So we're really glad to see so many of you who have been joining us week over week, and we're also glad to see some new faces as well. We're just going to give everyone a couple of minutes to get started, but I invite you to share who you are and where you're joining us from in the chat box while we wait. For those of you who have just jumped on, we're just waiting another minute for people to sign in, but we welcome you to use the chat box to let us know where you're joining us from. All right, so we're going to get started, and I'm just going to start with a couple of housekeeping notes. If you've been on these webinars before, these will be familiar. We do ask that you leave your video and your microphone off while the speakers are presenting. There will be time to turn your video and microphone on later when we get to the question and answer period. If you have any technical issues during this webinar, please email my colleague Caroline, and she can help you troubleshoot. If we all end up having technical issues and Zoom stops working, we will switch to phone, and the phone number is on the screen there as well as in your emails, and we will send out an email to everyone if that ends up happening, but so far the technology has been good to us on these webinars. Also, just a quick reminder to visit our website at cfleads.org for resources related to these webinars. So we do record each one and we share those recordings in the resources section of our website in case you aren't able to join us live in person. Deborah also shared her opening remarks from our first webinar in the form of a blog post, which you can read on our website as well. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Deborah now, who will talk a little bit about why we're hosting these webinars, as well as introduce our speakers for this week.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fourth webinar of the CF Leads webinar series, Connections in Times of Crisis. As Melody said, to those of you who've joined in the past, thanks for your continued engagement. And for those of you who are new, welcome. I want to reiterate that the forum is for community foundations who want to come together to swap stories and strategies as you navigate the consequences of the coronavirus. We're particularly interested in your community leadership to help your communities weather the immediate crisis, recover, and rebuild stronger than before. Over the past few weeks, I've had the opportunity to work with a number of community foundation CEOs, and you tell me you've never worked harder in your lives. Well, that's saying something given how hard I know you have worked in the past and know your colleagues are working equally hard. As you are in the thick of it, I hope you realize the incredible contribution you're making, even as you navigate virtual offices, sometimes very challenging politics, a lack of information, certainty of the pandemic and certainly end. Foundation are stepping up now is a why you are. Community foundations provide that unique civic infrastructure to help communities solve problems and actually realize their dreams. Few institutions have the broad government missions, your local knowledge, your relationships with donors, nonprofits, public and private sector. Few other institutions have that combination of things to help a community navigate a crisis as deep as this one. Your independence and flexible resources are also incredible assets. And you are helping us all to weather this storm. We knew the value of community foundations before, but now you are really proving it. On this webinar series, we are showcasing some of the good ideas you are implementing, recognizing that many of you are taking similar steps, but we firmly believe and have the history to show that people learn best from their peers, particularly in a volatile and fast-moving environment. So we'll continue to bring forth the work of community foundations across the country, and indeed across the world if it's valued, and connect you to resources that can be particularly helpful to community foundations. We hope that this provides you with some of the support you need as you work at a breakneck pace. And we also appreciate that your willingness to share what you are doing and to identify your pain points. We've got an ear to the ground, but we welcome a conversation with any of you if you're able to spend 15 or 20 minutes to talk to us. Most importantly, we will continue to be your advocate. Never have community foundations been more important. Never has your leadership of these remarkable institutions been more needed. So we really thank you for stepping up. As we've said before, at each of these Community Connection webinars, we will hear
Deborah, I think you muted yourself.
I muted myself. So in any case, we'll be hearing from community foundations all across the country, from all sizes, from rural, suburban, urban areas. And once we have a couple of community foundations, we will of course facilitate your questions and conversations in the best we can with the technology. And as Melody said, the technology has been fairly good to us. But we also really urge you to use the chat function. We've had a very active chat function, and we'll share the chat after the presentations. We will finally, we will have a bit of a very, very short poll on this particular webinar because we're really eager to know what topics are important to you right now so we can find the community foundations that are working in those areas. And then, as usual, we'll close out with a poem that we hope will give you just a bit of peace in these incredibly demanding times. So we are really fortunate to have two terrific speakers today. We have three speakers actually. We have Ellen Katz, who's the president and CEO of Cincinnati. We have Maeghan Jones, who's the president of the Community Foundation for Greater Chattanooga. And we have Joda, let me see if I can get this, Thongnopnua, I think, the Director of Communications, also at Chattanooga. So Ellen has served as President and CEO of the Greater Cincinnati Foundation for 5 years. Prior to joining the foundation, she served as President and CEO of the Children's Home of Greater Cincinnati for 10 years. And Ellen and her team also participated in our Equity Network cohort, and we got to see the power of the incredible inclusive culture that Ellen has helped build there. I'm going to talk about the important work they are doing with donors around the coronavirus and how they've been vigorously applying an equity lens to their work. And has been at the helm of Community Foundation for Greater Chattanooga since December 2016. In strategy development, donor cultivation, and engagement. And prior to joining the Community Foundation, she was president and CEO of the Chattanooga Area Food Bank. So prior to moving to Tennessee, Maeghan worked for 8 years, private in Colorado. And Joda is the director of communications. He also serves as the executive director of the Metro Ideas Project, which is a nonprofit policy research startup dedicated to bringing smart solutions to tough challenges. They are both going to talk about some of the helpful things that they are doing to support small business and how they are serving as a thought partner, leader, funder to both the not-for-profit sector, but also government and healthcare. So I will turn this over to Ellen.
Thanks, Deborah. Hi, everyone. It's good to kind of see you. Not really. It's fun to see your names on the screen. Anyway, thanks for continuing to do the CF Leads. I've found the past couple to be really super valuable. So I hope that what I have to offer for you today, you all find valuable as well. And the first thing that Deborah asked me to talk about was how we're working with our donors in this time. And we have had our donor partnerships really central to our strategy for a while. And we've been consistently upping our game with respect to that. And we've found this model to be so incredibly powerful. I mean, it's who we are as community foundations, but it's also been fueling our growth for a number of years. And we've been working under this banner of generous together, and maybe some of you use terms like that as well. But we have a continuum of donor engagement strategies, anywhere from influencing their grant-making choices to encouraging the pooling of resources, all the way to what we consider the ultimate brass ring of co-investing with us in our racial equity initiatives. So with the spirit of now is the time, we are taking that strategy to the next level and really marshaling everything we can against this crisis and its aftermath. And obviously we have a lot of resources that we can bring to the table, particularly when we come with donors and they open their funds quite wide. So the first way we've been going about this is through the development of our regional response fund. And I know so many community foundations across the country are doing this. We've gone to all of our donors and asked them to participate, as well as the private foundations that we serve in our region. We've really halted all other co-investment efforts on our RFPs or our responsive grant-making programs just to run a very rapid campaign in partnership with our Regional United Way. And we, in 2 weeks, raised $5 million. So that was really, really successful. And I'll talk a little bit about donor involvement in that in a moment. But I just wanted to let you know that at the same time, our philanthropic services team has turned their attention to really deepening our relationships with donors at this time. And we're really sort of branding this time, if you will, as bridging the distance. And by branding, we mean, what do we want our donors to truly feel in their experience with us? So we're doing very intensive and intentional reach outs to them. And what we would like them to take away from this time of pandemic with respect to their relationship with us is that we truly cared about them as individuals, and that came first and foremost. We're having lots of very personal conversations, and they're very much appreciating our reach out. We also want them to see GCF as a critical resource in determining how they meet their charitable goals. And this is a really important time. People are looking at estates, and it's just a critical time to get really, really close with our donors. And we also want them later to be able to say that they saw us amplify an incredibly powerful philanthropic response across the region. So all of these conversations that our relationship managers are having right now with donors is opening doors to lots of matchmaking opportunities. So we have some early stories. We're just like seeing the flywheel start to take some motion, but of the fund that I mentioned, it's actually grown to $7 million now. And we have about $1 million in contributions from donor advised funds at GCF, including one donor who wanted to challenge the community to participate, and she offered a $250,000 match only for check, credit card, and text to give contributions. So really seeking to democratize what it is that we're doing. And we met the match this morning, which is really super exciting, 675 gifts. So that is just amazing. We also had just gone through a business transaction with an iconic brand here in the region. helping them provide a charitable solution in the sale of their business. And the sale is being delayed, which I'm sure is not a huge surprise in this climate. But in reaching out to just check in on him and see how he's doing, we ended up with a $250,000 contribution to phase 2 of the campaign coming up. So great things are happening. We're talking to giving circles throughout our region, like Impact 100, to use our platform as a way for them to challenge the community to participate further in this crisis. We've even gone so far as connecting with the Cincinnati Art Museum that's taking a portion of its membership dues and contributing them to this regional response fund. So pretty amazing stuff. And then outside of the collaborative fund, we're also looking at ways that we as the community foundation can bring our donors to the table across other sectors. So we're socializing things that we're learning about, and something that just happened that I thought was particularly cool is we have a community development corporation in the region called 3CDC. They rebuilt one of the neighborhoods called Over the Rhine, and it's rebuilt with very small privately owned restaurants and shops. So obviously devastating for the rebirth of that community. But they set up a gift card match program so that people can buy gift cards. And when they do, 3CDC uses match money to buy an additional gift card to a resembling type of establishment. So we went to a donor knowing that she would just love this opportunity, and collectively we're contributing $50,000. We just split it. And the gift card match will now only be eligible for women and minority-owned businesses as part of this particular pool. So really good stuff happening with our donors. We're sort of wringing them out, but it's good. And then another subject that Deborah asked me to touch on is just how we're keeping racial equity at the core of what we're doing. I can say that racial equity has been our absolute North Star, and it's been a few years, certainly well established in the DNA, but as a true North Star, it's been a few years. We approach everything that we do with racial equity in mind, from hiring to granting to investing to all of our vendors. And we just really feel like the virus cannot infect that energy at this point. So we're really moving forward with racial equity as the true calling of this time of pandemic. So some ways that it's showing up for us so far is the way we're making contributions from the fund. There have been some interesting values challenges with the size of this collaborative and calibrating that, but we persist and it's working. We're really providing low barriers to access. Any organization can apply simply with an email. It's really super simple. You must be wondering, like, why would you set yourselves up for this? The administrative challenge is great. It is very, very huge, but we're willing to take it on because we know that this is an equitable platform. Anybody can access us, and it offers just a ton of community intelligence. Also, from the standpoint of equity, we're just really getting out of the way. We're not requesting much data. We're providing flexible funding, and we're trusting those who are closest to the issues of this crisis, those being the nonprofits, to make the right decisions. We don't need to question what those are because they truly know how to spend during this crisis time. We've also been really keenly focused on learning from very small organizations, non-traditional organizations. We are not taking the approach of finding the trusted few or group that we know. We are going deep into neighborhoods. We've partnered with an organization locally to do focus groups in neighborhoods, and now on calls like this, so that we're really getting a very informed voice into how we're making our grants. And then finally, we can't forget other sectors as we address basic human needs in this crisis, but we're looking to the art sector as well. And how do we enter into that space with our racial equity lens? And we're partnering right now with ArtsWave, which is our regional arts fund, to ensure that the restoration of the arts sector here, which is very important to who we are as a region, is very inclusive of diverse voices. We entered into this pandemic having invested quite a bit as a community foundation in bringing multicultural voices to the arts. And so we want to ensure that when we return, whatever that looks like, it will surely look like a very equitable and diverse art sector. So we turn our attention now to our donors in that regard. So quite a few exciting things going on. It's been really great to hear from those of you who have presented as well. Thanks for being such an amazingly sharing group. It's a pleasure to be a part of it.
Okay, hi everyone, I'm Maeghan Jones from Chattanooga. Some of you may know that in addition to COVID-19, we had a series of tornadoes in our community on Sunday night and are now responding to those, that disaster as well. It's been a really challenging time for our community, and we've been looking at how the role of philanthropy can help people not feel alone in this their darkest hour as they've lost homes in the middle of this pandemic. Deborah asked me to talk more about what we're doing with small businesses, but to touch on one thing that we're doing related to our grant making around COVID-19. As Ellen talked about, we too have embraced racial equity focus and having an equity lens in our work. So for our grant making, we also stood up a COVID-19 response fund, and we decided that one of the ways that equity needed to show up in that was in how we made decisions about how funds were dispersed. So like many of you, and like Ellen touched on, we have a very simple grant process, and it's open to organizations throughout our community, large and small. But we also put a community committee together with folks who represented communities that we thought would be particularly adversely affected, that had already been marginalized. And those included people like the person who runs our minority health fair, a doctor from Clinica Medicos, which is a local clinic specifically serving the Latinx community. And that has been really helpful, having that committee in place and giving them the power to make those funding decisions. So that is not, those decisions aren't made by staff, they are made by that committee of 7, which came together really quite quickly. And we were grateful for their leadership, and they've been meeting weekly. I'm mostly going to focus on our role with small businesses, and we have done a couple of things there. But to give you a little bit of background, we thought it was important to, I wanted to tell you a little bit more about where we are, how we got to this place with impact investing. So in 2018, we spent about a year studying impact investing and really thinking about how we use this other resource available to us through that strategy. I have to thank Ellen Katz, because Robert Killens on her team spent untold hours with us explaining what they had been doing and what they'd learned from their committee. It was really fantastic. And so through that study, we had a board member who led it. He's actually a financial advisor. He was very resistant to the idea, and I asked him if he would please lead this research, because he's quite brilliant, even though he was initially resistant. And he did, and he became a convert in his research and really brought the board along. So consequently, we made the decision to move 100% of our discretionary endowment to a social responsible ESG platform, which we have done. Incidentally, I might tell you that we have other funds in a more conservative, or traditional, I should say, Yale model endowment that we're all used to, multi-asset. And coming through COVID, at least in the first quarter, the ESG and the more traditional model are faring the same in terms of return, which has been interesting to see, and we're happy to see that, of course. So that was really helpful. That was with our endowment. But then we also said, okay, locally, how can we be using this resource to achieve the goals of the foundation? And so we agreed to use up to $1 million of our endowment for local impact investments. We started that with a program, what we were learning from the community, and again, applying that equity lens, was that there was a group of startups, new businesses, small businesses that didn't have access to traditional capital sources. These were minority and women-run businesses that we were hearing from. And we started to identify what the gaps were in the community in terms of financing. One of the gaps we heard is this early stage financing before they might be able to access bank and other opportunities for investment. And so we created a program with the Tennessee Valley Credit Union, our local credit union, where we would select through a committee process startups and minority-run and women-run businesses for this loan program. It would be a 3% loan with variable terms, and they would also be paired with an entrepreneur mentor, a successful business person from the community. Because one of the other things we heard from them is, in addition to financial capital, they really wanted to increase their social capital. So we have secured those loans with a CD at the credit union, and that has been proceeding for almost a year. Of course, during this time, we've gone back to the credit union to look at how we can make sure that the terms are such that these our small businesses can weather this time. And I say all this background to let you know this is how we began thinking about and getting involved with small businesses. It also was an opportunity to leverage some of the talent and interest of board members and donors who really wanted to have an impact in this area, and were also had a commitment to equity. And we saw that with the advent of COVID-19, and Joda's going to talk to you a little bit more about a specific role that we played in a moment. But to just give you a little background, we got a call from one of our donors who had become aware of the program that Chris Nani and his team in Birmingham have put together with the mayor's office. And that program provided loans to small business and was really stood up quite quickly. And so we began researching that with my colleague, Dwayne Marshall, who may be on this call. Really were able to reach out to Chris, who had already invested a lot in our community foundation, like Ellen, and had spent a lot of time with our board to find out what had happened. And we're able to bring that resource very quickly to our city and our city mayor's office, that quite frankly was quite overwhelmed. In a moment, Joda's going to talk to you about some work that he was able to do to help them frame the program that they put together. But before he did that, I wanted to talk about one other way that we are looking into supporting small businesses. We know that there are significant federal resources that will be coming available, and I think you all feel the pain that philanthropy will pale in comparison to the needs in this moment. So we want to be clear on where we can have the greatest impact. What we've heard from small businesses, from bankers and others, is that while this resource is available, the PPP loans and other things that you and your foundation and nonprofits may have applied for, it takes a certain level of expertise and even financial reporting, so 941s, that not every business has or has access to, and even getting to the point of being successful to put loan documents together is a barrier. And that it is particularly a barrier, as was brought to our attention, for our small minority-run businesses, who may also have had lack of access to other capital. So what a group has brought to us, and that we're looking into now investing in, is a local nonprofit. It would be curating alongside some bank partners, some partners that will be working with small businesses to help them prepare and position to gain these access to these resources. So they would sort of be vetting a stable of accountants and bookkeepers, marketing folks that can help transition a business to online, and also asking that that group provide a discounted rate. And the philanthropic opportunity there is to provide resources at an up to amount that these small businesses could spend with one of these technical assistance providers to help them prepare and take advantage of the resources that are available to them that not all of them have been able to. So we thought this was a really a great opportunity to leverage philanthropic dollars. And it has been a series of conversations with local bankers, nonprofits. Like I mentioned, Dwayne on our team has really been pulling some of those conversations together. But that is something that we see going forward, and we'll certainly happy to keep you all posted as that develops. With that, I do want to turn it over to Joda on our team, because he had a role that was unique. You know, we talk about the role of grant making and foundations, but I think this group in particular is as interested in the role of convening and influence. And in this case, it was really lending some technical expertise to the city, who, although they have that expertise generally, was just really, really spread thin, and helped them be more bold and be able to move more quickly, because they had a thought partner and a thought writer who could help them stand something up in a very stressful time. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Joda on our team.
Thanks, Maeghan. So I want to briefly touch on some of my prior work, which is and work that I do alongside the Community Foundation, which is really focused on urban policy. So I run a think tank focused on how do we help cities make better decisions, and how do we communicate those decisions more clearly. And so I had some experience on the policy side before coming over to the Community Foundation, and that world and that set of experiences and being able to draw on that was really valuable in this process. So as Maeghan said, we had a donor come to us saying that he was really invested in wanting to make sure that our small businesses felt supported in this time of need, especially the ones that were facing some substantial challenges due to the social distancing guidelines. We've seen the economy take a hit writ large, but I think that the bigger sectors that were taking even larger hits were sectors that were frankly being led by communities of color, service sectors. And so that donor really wanted to take the lead on fundraising for that work. And so there were several conversations between city government and our foundation, and the result of that conversation sort of started to peter out. But I realized that one of the important pieces and sort of a lesson learned is that in a moment of crisis, government is often responsive. They are understaffed. They are answering every question under the sun, and they are sort of the front door for the general public. And at this point, there was an executive order that shut down lots of companies within the city. And so we realized that there wasn't a central direction for this potential program that could leverage philanthropic dollars in the same way. That direction wasn't coming from the city. So we needed to outline what the possibilities were, and then also how they could be a sort of a central convener for a program. So we took the step of outlining the process in a memo. And I think this is one important lesson, is that you should step back, and whenever you realize that the city or any other government agency can be and play an assistive role or a convener role, is to clearly articulate that and make sure you're identifying very clearly how government can help. So we realized that we needed a few things from the mayor's office and city government. One was we needed them to identify and push an underwriter to actually come on board and be willing to write those loans. We had a few ideas, but the bully pulpit of the mayor's office ended up being an extraordinarily helpful push to get us over the finish line. The second piece was making sure that they were seeing philanthropy in a larger capital stack. So we could take on risk that other say government agencies couldn't, but that risk that we were taking on could serve a philanthropic purpose, but also bring other private capital to the table, as well as tax dollar money. And that's a lesson that we really kind of take to heart, which is that public-private partnerships often need a catalyst, and that catalyst can come from one of two directions, or maybe simultaneously. One, it can come from philanthropic dollars saying we'll take on the bulk of the initial risk, or it can come from a city saying we really need your help. But either one can really bring people to the table. I think also on top of all of that, realizing that equity had to be a central part of this loan work. And so we designed essentially a program that was creating a bridge loan. We recognized that this Small Business Administration was going to step in with a relief package. At the time it had not passed, but we anticipated that that was coming. But we knew that there was going to be a lot of time and a lot of paperwork in between that, and the community businesses needed help right now. And we designed a bridge loan program where the Community Foundation would house funding that would secure loans and essentially try to get funding out as quickly as possible in order to provide maybe 5 to 8 weeks worth of funding for companies to get paperwork filed with the SBA and get those initial loans. So it was essentially a bridge loan. That's not ultimately what ended up happening. The city took that idea and ended up pulling together about $2.5 million of city money using the same structure and reallocating that towards bridge loans. And so even though philanthropic dollars were not eventually allocated to this, they sort of said, this is a great brief. We need to do this, but we have some regulation quirks that we need to be able to accommodate. So this is best done with taxpayer money in the way and set up the way that we want it. But we also can kind of see a carve out for additional support that philanthropy can play. And I think that leads to another big lesson, which is that whenever you're identifying the big picture and the incentives, surprising solutions will emerge, but it shouldn't stop you from sort of outlining what you see as an ideal solution and then being able to be flexible to adjust to the realities on the ground. I saw a question that came in about how long it took the process to get the city on board with the program. I'd say about 5 or 6 days. We wrote the brief, sent it along. There was some initial discussions, and over a 5 to 6 day period, there was kind of a coming on. They started to work through what the program looked like on their end, and there were a lot of briefs that were kind of passed along. And I think a lot of the framing around the equity component was really important too, for us to say it was really important that we make loans that look like Chattanooga. A lot of times when you're making loans, you're just looking at credit scores, who's going to be profitable, but we wanted to make sure that equity was at the center of this and that we were preserving the essential character of what made Chattanooga a fantastic city to live in. And that means making loans to businesses that didn't look promising or looked challenging in the first place, maybe businesses that were operating on cash only, businesses that were very young, or businesses that had been operating on thin margins to begin with. And so that initial burst of energy and focus on the equity side also made it into the ultimate regulations and guidelines for the program that the city rolled out. I'll stop there. I know we're probably running out of time, but I'm also happy to answer any questions in the chat.
Thank you to all three of you. So Joda and Maeghan and Al can put your video on, and I'll go to the chat box and just go to your questions. So Carrie, a board member of CF Lead, she's from Kalamazoo. Carrie, did you want to ask your question to the group? Do you want to unmute yourself, possibly put your video on and ask your question of the group, if you're still there?
Sure.
Welcome, Carrie.
Audio. Can you hear me okay?
You can.
Great. So the Kalamazoo Community Foundation has also had equity as a North Star for a long time. Before I go any further, thank you all for your presentations. It's wonderful to see you all and hear your stories. And as we have been doing our fundraising efforts with our donors and engaging in a partnership with the United Way and really trying to mobilize resources to the most vulnerable, we can't help but see this as a very unique moment to help our donors and our agency partners deepen their understanding of racial disparities that have existed within our communities for a long time. And so we're just really curious if folks have found some great messaging, especially for folks who don't yet have a deep analysis around racial equity. how do you help them see what the spotlight is really showing, that systemic racism has created inequities that are being exacerbated because of the virus, and the disaggregated data really tease up that conversation? Just wondering if you have messages or success stories that you can share.
You know, I can start. We have not sent out a broad communication, although we did. I wrote an email to the board to really distill how COVID-19 has the potential to deepen economic divides and also racial disparities, and really just laid out that argument for them, because we had just been through a intensive board retreat where we were talking about those things, and they wanted to understand how the moment of now connected to what we've been talking about for 2 days at the retreat. So that's just internal so far. But one of the things we've been doing is more on one-to-one conversations with our board. With our donors. So this morning, for example, with the tornadoes, one of the communities that was impacted is a trailer park that is home to Latinx immigrants and undocumented. Some of them are undocumented. And so we asked a donor who had some interest in that to really think about setting aside specific funds for this group and to allow us to work through existing nonprofits who work with that population, and to do it in a way that was where we really let them lead, because we knew that they were going to understand the issues around confidentiality and the resources that were available, but that may put these communities in jeopardy. And that went really well. And they ended up moving a significant amount set aside just for that population. So we've been having lots of those conversations. Also, there's an opportunity, because we stood up that committee, to talk about why it's important that people making decisions are connected to some of the most adversely impacted communities, and have a close ties to marginalized and vulnerable populations. So when people ask about the decisions, that's another opportunity to explain how the connection between this and how it lays bare the inequities that are present in our community, and what the response should look like as a result. So far it's really been one-to-one, but I've been really impressed by how people have responded and how the message has resonated.
I'll also just jump in and add to that. I think one of the things that we've had a lot of success with is, as we have gotten, I think there's just sort of two separate challenges. One is getting your organization to, as a board and as a staff, to align toward equity, and then I think getting the broader community to align. And I think once you have the board and staff component, which is a lot more relational, and I think in both cases, generally having a very clear data case to make that shows the impact of inequity and segregation, and how that cuts along racial lines, not just economic lines, has been really powerful in pulling people who may have been resistant to a lot of this language in the first place. And so we sort of adjusted course a little bit and said, okay, let's look at this geographically, let's look at this economically, let's look at this socially, and kind of look at it through every data lens. And we've found that has really pulled skeptics on board. And one of our board members said recently that data isn't the entire story, but they are facts, and those are unavoidable. And I think it made making the argument a lot easier.
I could jump off that point with something that we're doing with respect to that question that's kind of different. We're actually working with a couple of movie producers, because we have been working with the community to educate about the origins and persistence of disparity. And we kept being asked, what is this new world that you think is going to come into view, or that we're talking about? And I think it's data is really important. And I think we make things overly academic at times. And we just wanted to sort of break out of that chatter and get to the hearts and minds of people. We have building community will for racial equity at the center of our strategy, but we just wanted a new way to do it. So we worked with this movie producing team and came up with an amazing video about what a racially equitable neighborhood place would look like. And now we're modifying that with them to tell a story that connects to what we've been telling about, like, now you see it, now that we've had this pandemic, like, can you see it even more? So we're looking to just a different kind of medium to engage, in particular, the donors.
Great, thank you all.
Ellen, would you be willing to share that video with a link?
Yes, I would. I just have to figure out how to do that for you, and I will.
And we'll help you, Ellen. And then it looks like someone's just looking for the name of the impact investing study. If you can either add it in the chat or share it now, but we'll be sure that it's part of the resources we share with you when we share all this information. And then Greg Payne, you've had a number of questions. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask a few questions as follow-up?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Really enjoy these chats again. I've attended the last one and was able to listen to the one, I guess, 2 weeks ago. Very inspiring. Really enjoy these, the panelist representatives. So I'm based in the Washington, D.C. area. I provide a lot of direct support to underrepresented entrepreneurs and social enterprises and nonprofits in the area. And obviously there's a lot of work to do these days in that regard. And so I'll say that I really appreciate the presentation, because as I was typing in my questions, a lot of my questions were answered. But I guess my two questions would be, since I know there's a number of folks on the call here, just a general offer if anybody's in the DC area and would like to have a conversation around perhaps replicating some of what our panelists have done, because I think it's very inspiring and very, very thoughtful and very intentional. And I guess my second question would be for the panelists, again, with regards to catalytic capital and magnifying the impact of what your community foundation can do. Wonderful examples here. I wonder if practically, what are and you've talked about it a lot already, but if you could boil it down to maybe the three most important steps to take in order to be, to orient yourself or your organization to play this catalytic capital role, whether and I don't mean to trivialize, but I'm curious if you could sort of boil it down to three most important things to keep in mind. If that question made sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing, the two things that stand out to me, and I'll think of a third as I'm talking, but I think one is figure out where you want to be in the capital stack. Like that, I think that's a really important question, and it gets to the second point, which is figure out your risk tolerance. If you as a philanthropic organization are able to lean into risk, you can be a really catalytic force in ways that the private sector and frankly taxpayer dollars can't. And then realize, don't think about the capital as a question of how. I think this is just a helpful point in the conversation that we have a lot internally, is not thinking about our dollars as a cause and effect, but rather as a key that unlocks other sort of subsequent dominoes that fund other programs and the outcomes that we're looking to see and the impact that we're interested in, right? So, making sure that you know where you want to be in the capital stack, understanding your risk tolerance, and then kind of figuring out what you're unlocking with your key. Those are three things that stand out to me.
No, that's wonderful. Great summary. Thank you.
Great. There's one more question that I think we can accommodate from Catherine Frazier. If you're still there, you can unmute yourself or turn on your video if you're comfortable. Catherine, are you still there? Catherine Frazier?
Hello, yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you tell us where?
Catherine Fraser is my name.
Great.
I serve on a Delaware Hispanic Commission for the state, and I just was given this. I was sent this email some time ago. We're having a meeting tonight, and I was interested on the video. So that's how I came onto it, and I came on late. I guess my question is, what is the funding source to initially, is it a grant that we apply for? I see they talked about the SBA and a bridge loan, but I'm sure there's a grant before that, or am I incorrect? Like, you know, how do you get the money to fund it in the first place?
So I can take that, and Megan, you can hop on. I mean, I think one of the programs that we were talking about were, I think there were two different sets of programs. One, Megan was talking about an emerging support for small businesses that we were talking about, particularly very small businesses that don't have the paperwork or the expertise to apply for SBA grants. And some of that would frankly come from our fund holders. So these are folks that have a philanthropic interest. These are donors that have a philanthropic interest in supporting small business, and we would sort of convene them into a central fund and use that those dollars that they've allocated, maybe out of a donor advised fund or something, into a security that can act as collateral for a fund. And then the separate, and Megan, you can correct me if I'm wrong on that one, but then the separate question was around the funding that the city put together. We were originally going to stand that up with with fundraising from private donors that would be go into a central fund, and then leverage additional funding, say from Community Reinvestment Act dollars, from banks, taxpayer dollars that would come from reallocated HUD money that was being allocated to local governments, and also like funding that was allocated to the Industrial Development Board on the city side. So we were pushing the city to get really creative with where they were going to pull funding from. Those would all kind of end up in different buckets, but we initially were proposing catalyzing that with private fund holder dollars out of donor advised funds and other private capital.
Well, what I'm trying to determine, I guess somebody have to talk to me separately, is that, you know, you have people that have money and they want to put it somewhere. Okay. So you created some kind of foundation.
So at the community foundation,
the first one.
At the community foundation, we have fund holders that hold donor advised funds, and those folks have a relationship with us. And
Who is us?
The community foundation at Greater Chattanooga. Sorry, I should have specified.
So Catherine, we're happy to help you. These are all community foundations on the call.
Okay,
and
we are happy.
We're happy to connect you and talk with you about how this works, and happy to connect after the call.
Okay.
So thanks for joining us, though. So I think the last thing we're doing, because I don't see any more questions. I don't think I missed any more questions. Just want to tell you about next week. Next week, we're going to have Dr. Eric Jolly, who is President and CEO of St. Paul and Minnesota Foundations. They're doing a remarkable range of things, from working with some structures of the not-for-profit sector, doing some amazing work in the policy realm, and then some really interesting work with residents. Then some of you may have heard Chris Hermans, who's from the Seattle Foundation. I think she spoke on Council on Foundations webinar. But you can, as you know, Seattle was kind of ground zero for a while, and so they have a lot of lessons because they're a little bit out in front of everybody. So we're really lucky to hear from both of them next week. So now we're going to test our chops with this poll. We will be sending you out a poll, and if you could just quickly respond. So Melody will be sending you out to everyone, and you should be able to respond. So tell us if there's anything in particular we need to do, Melody. We don't see anything right now.
Yeah, it's not working on my end. Caroline, I don't know if you're able to launch it on your account. If not, we can just do it next week.
Yep. There we go. So please answer the question. I can see a lot helpful. A lot of interest in a lot of different things. Great. Wonderful. And someone also has to have some rural focus. We hear you. Great. Okay. Melody, should we end the polling now? What do you suggest? Is that, sorry folks, with us just experimenting on the technology here.
Yeah, we're just testing this out for the first time. Yeah, let's end it, and we'll save it on our end and look through everyone's suggestions. And thank you to those who have included other suggestions in the chat box as well. And we'll definitely be considering these as we move forward with our weekly webinar planning.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. That was very helpful, and we'll begin to master that even more as the weeks go on. So we'd like to close this out in our usual way. And Len, if you want to unmute yourself and share a poem. And I'm going to sign off, but we'll sign off all together after the poem. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Deborah, and thank you again to our presenters today. Really great information. So today we'll be reading The Peace of Wild Things by Wendell Berry. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free. Thank you so much for participating in this week's webinar. Deborah, do you want to close us out, or?
Everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Just for the person who asked where this webinar will be posted, I'll be posting the recording on our website likely tomorrow. So that's cfleads.org/resources. And the title of the poem that was just read is The Wild Things, The Peace of Wild Things, I believe. But we'll send the link around as well after the webinar. Thanks, everyone.